Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our daily Bible study through the book of Exodus. So, I don't even know what's in store today. My Bible says responsibility for property, so that just sounds thrilling. But yesterday when we had animal control laws, I was thinking, like, oh, what are we going to talk about for animal control laws? And yet there was this nugget about if an ox has been known to thrust and you don't pen it in and then it kills someone, man, that's on you. If it was an accident we didn't know that the dog had these tendencies, well, then that's different. But when and so we talked about setting up fences and just how, like, with sin, when we know we're prone to certain behaviors, to certain temptations, that we need to put up walls. So it's beautiful to see how even these Old Testament laws and parts of the Mosaic Law and Code, like, they have nuggets that we can learn from. And it reminds me always of 1 Corinthians 10 when Paul tells the Corinthians how these things have been written as your examples to whom the ends of the age have come. That's us. How we have examples in the Old Testament. It's not a law that we have to follow per se, but it's an example that we can learn from. So let's find out about property. Verse 1 of chapter 22. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox, 4 sheep for a sheep. If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. He should make full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or a donkey or sheep, he shall restore double. So, I'm just rereading verse 3 here to make sure I've got it all right. There's an on there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. Aha. So here's the idea. So to start, we see a principle that if a thief steals something, the greater the value of the item actually is the greater of the payback. You'll notice that you have to pay back 5 oxen for an ox, but only 4 sheep for a sheep. And I think you see something about the Old Testament law that is really useful for us to understand is that it was treated like case law. So today we have laws in our country. We all know that. But much is also determined by case law. This is where lawyers do come in very handily, because the laws can't cover every single scenario. That would be exhaustive. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what if this happens? Well, what if that happens? But what happens over time is judges make a judgment. There's this long, drawn-out court case, and then finally, this is what we decide justice is. Well, from that point forward, future court cases will look to those court cases and say, hey, in this case, these were the circumstances, and they determine that this is the way that applies. And although it's not necessarily a written rule in our government in a way, it does set precedents. And then from that day forward, this is why certain Supreme Court things and other things are such a big deal. Because it's like when one church got the right, that we're going to have church, and you guys can't tell us we can't have church. As soon as one battle was won in court, it's like dominoes going. Because it's not like they can't just say, well, this church can and this church can't. Like, no, like, we've already established this church can. So any other church that shows up with a similar scenario, it's all going to go. And so I bring all this up because here with the oxen, people sometimes get frustrated. Well, why doesn't the Bible say this? Why didn't the Bible clarify that? It's like God was just laying down the basics. And then from there, logical laws were then increased. because much of this law in the Mosaic Law, and one of the reasons why we're not, it's one of the more clear parts of why we're not bound to the Mosaic Law is because much of it is civil law. This is about what to do if someone steals. It's not, is stealing a sin? It's, these are the laws, part of the Mosaic laws. If you steal a sheep, you return 4 sheep if you've killed that sheep. And so the idea is this, though, is that you steal something small, then you need to return that maybe double. But if it's something larger, well, now you have to return that times 4. Well, it's really big, that times 5. And so it just shows that the greater the crime, there's an exponentially even greater punishment. So this is the idea of case law. We see this in the Bible. Okay, you start taking really big stuff. Well, it's supposed to dissuade you, making you understand the bigger the theft, like even greater the penalty. Now, in verse 2, right, pretty straightforward. There's no guilt for killing a thief who's breaking into your house. I think that someone still survived. Someone breaks into my home, I'm assuming they're a threat, right? And so God says, hey, but then it says if the sun has risen on them, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. What's that about? Well, the idea is if someone breaks it into your house, and we're assuming you're not living way out in the boondocks, but if someone breaks into your home and you kill them, that you would deal with it immediately. You'd go tell your neighbor, hey, man, this just happened. This is right now going on. Someone else gets to come and take a look at this at the scene of the crime while the crime is still hot. And the idea is it's a little sketchy if you just leave the guy there. And the sun comes up, assuming a thief comes at night, right? That's kind of the idea, is that these things need to be dealt with. And if he's just found dead later on, like, who's this dead guy? Oh, he's a thief who was breaking in. That's sketchy. And so God is saying, hey, if someone breaks in, you can defend your family, but it needs to get dealt with and dealt with right away. Now, remember, they couldn't call 911. Things were a bit different back then. And then notice in verse 4 where it says, if the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall restore double. So if he's already taken it and eaten it, 4-fold, 5-fold, or he's sold it 4-fold, 5-fold, but if it's caught in his hand, well, he pays back double. And maybe this is supposed to be gracious because the guy maybe stopped. Maybe he had second thoughts and returns the donkey. And he returns it before it turns into a 4-fold, 5-fold event. He returns it when it's only double. You see, he is stopping, recognizing his sin, and dealing with it a little bit quicker. I'm reading into verse 4, trying to understand the reasoning behind it. Because God has reasons for his laws. He has reasons for his rules. He has reasons why, if it's already taken and sold, it's a bigger penalty than if you return the very same lamb, the very same ox or donkey or whatever else it may be. There's so many more of these rules in here, and I'm just kind of curious on how far to go. Let's just keep moving forward, and we'll see. Maybe something will jump out extra, in my face. If a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal, and it feeds on another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. So, yeah, in short, if I find my ox in your field, well, then I need to make sure I pay you back for all that my ox ate. I think the idea here is that it was an accidental thing. If fire breaks out and catches the thorn so that stacked grain or standing grain or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall make restitution. Again, accidents. Accidents, you still need to pay back what you did wrong. If a man delivers his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall be paid double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. So again, it's kind of like if I have your stuff and it disappears, well, if they catch the thief deals, obviously that's the thief's problem. But if you can't catch the thief and your stuff just disappeared, it just says, like, I'm going to be under judgment just to make sure nothing fishy is going on. For any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, donkey, sheep, clothing, or any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whoever the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. If a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey, an ox, sheep, or any other animal, and it dies, is hurt, or is driven away, no one seeing it, then the oath of the Lord shall be between them both, that he has not put his hand to his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept it, and he shall not make it good. But if in fact it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner. If it has been torn to pieces by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence, and he shall not make good for what was torn. Interesting, in Genesis 31:39, you find Jacob with Laban. And Jacob tells Laban, like, hey, like, when I've been watching over your goats and your sheep, I've always made good, and I never came to you with evidence showing that something had been taken by an animal. And what he was kind of saying was that this was the practice, was that, oh, a wolf ate it. Well, you needed to find like a leg or something to show, like, yeah, here's a little bit of the leftovers to show you that an animal ripped it apart. Joseph told Laban, no, if one of your things disappeared, I just covered the cost. I never tried to, because that was the way they could show it was out of their control. And I'm just going to finish up 14:15. If a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it becomes injured or dies, like if you borrow an animal, the owner of it not being with it, he shall surely make it good. If the owner was with it, he shall not make it good. If it was hired, it came for its hire. So this whole section dealing with personal property, what to do with this, what to do in that scenario. And God understands that our stuff is important and we need it to survive. And he's laid out all these rules. But what I love about the Old Testament law is just how much common sense it is. It's really common sense. If you mess something up, make restitution. And if it seems like there was foul play, well, then you're going to get penalized and pay back double, 4 times, 5 times. And so I think it's just a good reminder for us, and maybe just as a closing thought and a reminder about making restitution, about how big of a deal it is for us as Christians to make sure we're always making restitution. It's one thing to be in the right, but it's another thing to make things right. And I think of all people, wouldn't it be horrible that as a Christian, people think of us as someone who has stolen from them, shorted them, was sly or dishonest with them? We should always be going above and beyond. And that's kind of what God is trying to call his people to here, is that in our dealings, people always walk away feeling like they had a fair deal and even a great deal. And that we're not going to try and, work a quick one in there or shy them or short them. You borrow someone's car, fill up the gas tank when you return it. It's things like that where we should always be above and beyond generous. And if you don't have the financial means to be above and beyond generous, then you better be very generous with your words and with your behavior and your thankfulness. We don't want to be stealing from people, even if it was accidental, because right here it mentions accidental things still have to have restitution be made. And that's something that we need to remember these days, is that if you get to Leviticus and we get to the sin offerings, right, there's a whole sin offering for unintentional sin. Sin that was done, but unintentionally. But yeah, he's like, but you still had to have a sacrifice for it. Restitution still had to be made, even if it's an accident. And so be thinking about it. That even if it's an accident, even if it was unintentional, it's our job We are the ones who should step up and make restitution. Ask for forgiveness. Verify, did I accidentally offend you? I'm sorry if I said something that could have upset you. Make restitution. Be the one who initiates the process. And I think that's the whole thing, that when people see your good works, it'll glorify your Father in heaven. And that's what we're all about. So there you guys go. Have a great day. I will see some of you tonight at church for Psalm 37 and prayer. God bless you guys.